You think you know how this story ends. A girl, a stampede, a rescue, but you have no idea. Today I'm going to tell you about Victoria Ashford, a 22-year-old woman living in the Dakota Territory in 1874. When she saw a Comanche boy about to be trampled by 300 stampeding buffalo, she made a choice. A choice that brought 150 warriors to her doorstep. And what happened next? Well, let's just say it wasn't what anyone expected. It was something far more dangerous and far more incredible. The ground didn't just shake, it screamed. Victoria Ashford felt it first through the hooves of her horse in Stella, a low guttural vibration that grew into a roar, like a freight train made of thunder and bone. She crested the small hill, her emerald eyes squinting against the scorching sun, and her blood turned to ice. Below her, the prairie was no longer grass and dirt. It was a moving sea of brown fur and sharpened horns. A buffalo stampede. 300 of them, maybe more, their massive bodies a single, unstoppable force of nature. They kicked up so much dust the sky itself seemed to be bleeding into the earth. But it wasn't the buffalo that made her heart stop. It was the boy, a small figure no older than 13, running for his life just ahead of the thundering wave of death. His dark hair flew behind him, his legs pumping desperately. He stumbled, fell, and for a horrifying second, disappeared from sight. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. Then he was up again, scrambling, his small body a fragile leaf in the path of a hurricane. From the buckskin leggings and the intricate beadwork on his shirt, she knew instantly. He was Comanche, and that should have been the end of it. Every instinct, every warning her father had ever given her, screamed at her to turn away. The Comanche were not friends. They were the reason her brother James was dead. 2 summers ago, a raid had stolen him from their lives, leaving a wound that had never healed. This boy was one of them. The enemy. Letting nature take its course would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do. But as she watched him stumble again, his face a mask of pure terror, she didn't see an enemy. She saw a child. And in that split second, Victoria Ashford made a choice that would change everything. "Come on, Stella!" she yelled, her voice nearly lost in the roar. She dug her heels into her mare's sides, and they plunged down the hill, not away from the danger, but straight into the heart of it. The ground vibrated so violently now that Victoria's teeth rattled in her skull. The sheer power of the herd was a physical presence, a wall of sound and fury. She galloped parallel to the stampede, the lead bulls just yards to her left, their eyes wild with primal fear. The boy was fading fast. His desperate sprint had slowed to a labored jog. He wouldn't last another minute. He was running toward a small outcropping of rocks, the only shelter for miles. But he was never going to make it. She had to do something else. Victoria pulled her rifle from its scabbard, the cold steel familiar in her hands. She fired 2 shots into the air. The sharp cracks were like pebbles thrown into an ocean. The herd didn't even notice. They were a force beyond reason, beyond fear of a simple gunshot. A new plan was needed, and it had to be formed in the space of a heartbeat. Spurring Stella harder, she angled her horse in, a terrifying maneuver that brought them into the very edge of the stampede. A huge bull swerved, its horn grazing Stella's flank, and the horse shrieked but held its course, trusting its rider completely. Victoria could see the boy's face now, streaked with dirt and sweat, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it felt like she was looking into the face of death itself. But there was something else there too, a flicker of defiance, a refusal to give up. "Jump!" she screamed, leaning low in her saddle and stretching her arm down as far as it would go. She doubted he could even hear her over the thunder of 10,000 hooves. But he saw, his dark eyes locked with hers. For a split second, a universe of fear, confusion, and a desperate, impossible hope passed between them. He didn't hesitate. He leaped. His fingers brushed hers, then locked around her wrist. The force of it almost ripped her from the saddle. Her arms screamed in protest, but she held on, her muscles straining. With a guttural cry, she hauled him upward, swinging his small body through the air and onto the back of her horse. He landed behind her, his arms instantly wrapping around her waist in a death grip. "Hold on!" she shouted, the words torn from her lungs. The buffalo were all around them now, close enough to touch. She could smell their musky scent, Feel the radiating heat from their massive, sweating bodies. Their wild eyes rolled, showing whites of pure panic. It was like riding through the middle of an earthquake. Victoria steered Stella sharply right, pulling away from the densest part of the herd. For what felt like an eternity, they were caught in the chaos, dodging and weaving through the stragglers on the fringe. A horn here, a shoulder there, each a hair's breadth from disaster. The boy's tight grip was the only thing keeping him from being thrown into the path of the beast behind them. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The last of the buffalo thundered past, leaving behind a choking cloud of dust and an almost supernatural silence. The world, which had been a symphony of chaos, was now quiet, eerily quiet. Victoria slowed Stella to a walk, the horses' sides heaving, both of them gasping for air. She turned to look at the boy. He was still clinging to her, his face buried in her back. He was alive, streaked with grime, exhausted, but alive. She dismounted, her own legs trembling, and helped him down. They stood facing each other in the settling dust, two strangers from different worlds, bound together by a shared brush with death. He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw something that defied all her expectations. Pure, unadulterated gratitude. He spoke in rapid Comanche, his voice still shaky, gesturing back toward the direction the buffalo had gone. She didn't understand the words, but the meaning was unmistakable. He was thanking her. She just nodded, her heart still hammering against her ribs. And as she looked at him, really looked at him, the full weight of what she'd done crashed down on her. This wasn't just a boy. This was a Comanche boy, a member of the very tribe that had murdered her brother. In the eyes of her own people, what she had just done was nothing short of treason. But looking at his young face, seeing the spirit and intelligence shining through the fear and exhaustion, she felt no regret. Only a strange, unsettling sense of connection. He was small for his age, with the lean, wiry build of someone who lived a hard life. He pointed to himself. Nalnish, he said, his pronunciation careful. Victoria, she replied, pointing to herself. And then she did something her father had taught her, something she did without thinking. She extended her hand. Nalnish looked at her hand, then at her face. A flicker of confusion in his eyes. He slowly, carefully took it. His grip was firm, his palm calloused. In that single, simple touch, an invisible wall between their two worlds seemed to crumble into dust. That's when they heard it, the sound of hoofbeats, not the chaotic thunder of buffalo, but the rhythmic, deliberate drumming of horses being ridden hard and fast. Victoria looked up, and her heart sank into her boots. A dust cloud was rising in the distance, and from it emerged the unmistakable silhouettes of riders. Dozens of them, a Comanche war party. They were coming right for them. Nalnish saw them too. His entire demeanor changed. The gratitude in his eyes was replaced by a fierce, protective urgency. He spoke rapidly in his own language, gesturing from Victoria to the approaching warriors. She didn't need a translation to understand. He was trying to warn her, trying to protect her, but there was nowhere to run. The war party was closing in fast. Victoria could now make out the individual riders. Their faces were painted for war, their bodies lean and powerful. They carried rifles and war lances. She counted 20, then 30, then more. There had to be at least 50 of them. She was alone, outnumbered, and outgunned. Her hand instinctively went to the rifle still in its scabbard on Stella's saddle. This was it. This was how she died, betrayed by her own compassion. But then something impossible happened. As the warriors drew near, their horses kicking up a storm of dust, Nalnish did something she never would have expected. He stepped forward, placing his small body directly between Victoria and the lead rider. He stood there, defiant and unafraid, and called out to them. His young voice, sharp and clear, cut through the tension-filled air. The lead warrior, a man who could only be the chief, was magnificent and terrifying. He wore a headdress of eagle feathers that cascaded down his back, and his face was a mask of stern authority. He raised a hand, and the entire war party pulled to a sudden, disciplined halt. A rapid, intense conversation erupted between the chief and Nalnish. The boy spoke with a passion that was breathtaking, gesturing back at Victoria, then to the trampled ground where the buffalo had passed. Victoria stood frozen, her hand still on her rifle, feeling the weight of 50 pairs of hostile eyes on her. They were studying her, dissecting her, their faces a mixture of suspicion and raw curiosity. Finally, the chief's gaze settled on her. It was an ancient gaze, filled with a wisdom and a hardness that seemed to see right through her soul. He spoke a few quiet words to Nalnish. The boy turned back to Victoria. His English was slow, halting, but the words he spoke hit her with the force of a physical blow. "He is Chief Tashawait," Nalnish said. "He say, you saved Nalnish from Buffalo." He gestured from himself to the chief. "He say, you saved life of his grandson." Grandson. The word hung in the air, heavier than stone. She hadn't just saved a random Comanche boy. She had saved the heir to a powerful chief. The implications of that crashed over her in a dizzying wave. This wasn't just a simple rescue anymore. This was a political incident. Chief Tashawait spoke again, his voice a low rumble. Nalnish translated. "Grandfathers say, Comanche honor this debt, a life for a life. You are now under the protection of the Wandering Wolf Band." Protection? What did that even mean? Before she could even process it, the chief spoke again, his tone now carrying the weight of a formal decree. Nalnish listened intently, his face serious. He turned back to Victoria, and his next words made her world tilt on its axis. "Chief say, tomorrow, when sun rises, Comanche come to your home." He took a breath, as if the words themselves were heavy. "We bring gifts to honor the brave woman who saved his family. This is the Comanche way." Her mind reeled. A war party, a peaceful war party, at her family's ranch? Her father would see them coming and organize a defense. The settlers would see them and start a small war. It would be a bloodbath. "Tell the chief," Victoria said, her voice shaking slightly. "I am honored. But my people, they won't understand. They will see warriors and they will see a threat." Nalnish nodded, his young face showing a grim understanding. He relayed her concerns to his grandfather. The chief listened, his expression unreadable, and then replied with a short, decisive statement. Nalnish turned back. "Grandfather say he understands. White people fear what they do not know. But a life debt is sacred. It must be paid. We will come, but we will come in peace. No war paint. We will carry gifts, not weapons of war." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple, Victoria knew she had no choice. She had stepped across a line, and there was no going back. Her single act of compassion had set in motion a chain of events that she couldn't control. "I understand," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Tell Chief Tachawait that Victoria Ashford will be waiting." The chief gave a single, solemn nod. Without another word, he turned his horse and led his warriors away, melting back into the dusk from which they came. Victoria was left alone in the vast, silent prairie, the weight of the coming dawn already pressing down on her. She had saved one life, but tomorrow she might be responsible for the deaths of many more. The floorboards of the porch creaked under Victoria's boots as she paced, a lone figure in the pre-dawn gloom. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw two things: the terror on Nalnish's face and the unreadable expression in Chief Tuckawait's. How could she explain this to her father? How could she make him understand that the arrival of dozens of Comanche warriors wasn't a declaration of war, but a gesture of profound respect? The ranch house behind her was more than just wood and nails. It was 15 years of her family's blood, sweat, and tears. Her father, William Ashford, had built it with his own hands, a stubborn monument to hope in a harsh and unforgiving land. And now her actions threatened to bring it all crashing down. The sound of heavy boots on the floorboards announced his arrival. William Ashford stepped onto the porch, a tall, lean man whose face was a roadmap of prairie sun and sorrow. His pale blue eyes, so much like her own, were filled with concern. "You've been out here all night," he said, his voice quiet. "Something's wrong." Victoria stopped pacing and faced him, the words she'd rehearsed 1,000 times catching in her throat. "Papa," she began, her voice unsteady, "I need you to listen. Just listen, before you say anything." His expression hardened. "Go on." She told him everything: the stampede, the boy, the impossible rescue. She watched his jaw tighten at the word Comanche. You helped one of them, William said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. I saved his life, Papa. He was just a child. He would have been trampled. William turned to look out over the vast empty prairie, his shoulders slumping slightly. Your brother was a child too, Victoria. Have you forgotten what they did to James? The words were a physical blow, striking the old, unhealed wound in her heart. No, she whispered. I'll never forget. But this boy didn't kill James. He was just a boy. And Papa, there's more. She took a deep, shaky breath. The boy I saved. He's the grandson of Chief Tashawait. William turned back to her, his eyes wide with disbelief. And they're coming here, Victoria finished in a rush. This morning, the chief is bringing gifts to honor the debt. The color drained from her father's face. Here? How many? I don't know. 50, maybe more. But they're coming in peace. The chief gave his word. The word of a Comanche chief? William spat, the bitterness of his grief momentarily overriding his reason. He caught himself, a flicker of shame in his eyes. He had raised her to be better than that, to judge a person by their character, not their tribe. I'm sorry, he mumbled, but Victoria, do you have any idea what will happen when word gets out? The settlers will panic. They'll see this as an alliance with the enemy. They'll come for us. Then we make them understand the truth, Victoria said, a fire igniting in her chest. We show them that peace is possible. You truly believe that? He asked, his voice heavy with doubt. That we can host a Comanche delegation without it ending in a massacre? I have to believe it, Papa, she said, because if I don't, then James died for nothing. As if summoned by her words, a new sound reached them, the distant rhythmic beat of horses. Not a charge, but a procession. Victoria's heart leaped into her throat. She looked to the east, and there they were. A long line of riders, silhouetted against the rising sun. They're here, she breathed. William moved instinctively toward the rifle rack just inside the door. No! Victoria grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Papa, please. No weapons. If they see us armed, it's over before it begins. And if it's a trap, we'll be slaughtered where we stand. It's not a trap, she said, with a conviction she didn't truly feel. I trust him. William hesitated, his hand hovering over the cold steel of a rifle. He looked from the approaching riders to his daughter's determined face. He saw the same fire in her eyes that had burned in her mother's. With a heavy sigh, he stepped away from the weapons. I'm trusting you, Victoria. God help us all if you're wrong. The delegation drew closer, and Victoria could see the details. Chief Tashawait rode at the head, his magnificent war bonnet replaced by a simpler, more ceremonial headdress. He and his warriors were dressed not for battle, but for an occasion of state. Riding proudly beside his grandfather was Nalnish. They stopped a respectful 30 yards from the house. Chief Tashawait dismounted and approached alone, his every movement radiating power and dignity. William Ashford, the chief said, his English heavily accented but clear. I am Tashawait. I come to honor your daughter. William stepped forward, matching the chief's formal tone. Chief Tashawait, you are welcome here. A life debt must be honored, the chief said simply. Your daughter acted with the heart of a warrior. She risked her own life for a child of her enemy. This is a great thing. He gestured to his men. Several dismounted, carrying large bundles wrapped in buffalo hide. They laid them on the ground before Victoria. Richly decorated robes, intricate beadwork, and one item that took her breath away. A bow, its wood gleaming, adorned with carvings and eagle feathers. This was my father's bow, Tashawait said. It is given only to those who have earned our deepest respect. Victoria was overwhelmed. Chief, I can't accept this. The chief's stern face broke into a rare, faint smile. You did not save my grandson for a reward. You saved him because it was the right thing to do. That is precisely why you deserve it. But as the ceremony continued, a new dust cloud appeared on the horizon, to the south, and this one was moving much, much faster. Victoria's blood ran cold. She knew who it was. The settlers. Word had gotten out. William saw them too. "Chief," he said urgently, "we have a problem. Those riders, they're settlers. They're armed and they're not coming for coffee." Tasha Waite's eyes narrowed, his expression turning to granite. "How many?" "At least 60, William estimated, and they're led by Marcus Crawford." The name hung in the air like a death sentence. Crawford was a hard man, a man whose wife and daughter had been killed in a Comanche raid 3 years prior, a man who saw every Native American as a target for his vengeance. He would not stop to ask questions. He would shoot first and celebrate later. Nalnish spoke rapidly to his grandfather, translating the new terrifying development. Chief Tashawait stood for a moment, his gaze fixed on the approaching cloud of dust. Victoria expected him to order his men to mount up, to prepare for a fight or a strategic retreat. He did neither. Instead, he walked to the center of the yard, turned to face his own men, and called out in a voice that boomed across the prairie, "Warriors of the Wandering Wolf, lay down your weapons." His warriors didn't hesitate. In a display of absolute discipline, they placed their rifles and lances on the ground, in plain sight. It was a gesture of trust so profound, so utterly unexpected, that it brought tears to Victoria's eyes. But she knew it wouldn't be enough. Crawford wouldn't see it as a peace offering. He would see it as an opportunity. Just as the thought crossed her mind, the militia thundered over the hill and into the ranch yard, surrounding the house in a storm of dust and fury. Marcus Crawford swung down from his horse, his hand already on the butt of his pistol, his eyes burning with a cold, righteous hatred. "Ashford," he roared, "what is the meaning of this? Are you and the girl all right?" "We're fine, Marcus," William said, his voice dangerously calm. "These are our guests." "Guests?" Crawford laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Have you gone mad, William? These are the savages who murdered your son." Before William could answer, Chief Tackawhite himself stepped onto the porch. He stood there, unarmed and unflinching, a king in the face of a lynch mob. "I am Tackawhite," the chief said, his voice steady. "We come to honor a debt." "The only debt you people understand is paid in blood," Crawford spat. Victoria couldn't stay silent. "That's not true. They came in peace. They laid down their weapons the moment they saw you coming." Crawford sneered. "It's a trick. It has to be a trick." "Marcus Crawford," Chief Tackawhite said, and the fact that he knew Crawford's name sent a chill down Victoria's spine. "I know of your pain. You lost your family. I, too, have lost family to the white soldiers. This path of vengeance, it only leads to more empty homes, more graves." "How dare you speak of my family?" Crawford roared, his hand tightening on his pistol. "I dare because your pain and my pain are the same," the chief replied, his voice softening slightly. "But this young woman," he gestured to Victoria, "she has shown us a different path. She chose compassion over fear. Perhaps it is time we learn from her." The air was so thick with tension, it was hard to breathe. 60 rifles were aimed at 20 unarmed men. Her family was caught in the middle. The slightest movement could ignite a firestorm, and that's when Nalnish stepped forward. He walked past his grandfather, past Victoria, and stood at the edge of the porch, looking directly at the man who wanted to kill him. "I am the boy she saved," he said, his young voice ringing with a courage that shamed every armed man in the yard. "The buffalo would have killed me. She could have watched, but she didn't." He looked straight into Crawford's hate-filled eyes. "If your child was running from the buffalo, would you not want someone to save them?" The boy's simple, honest question struck the heart of the conflict. Several of Crawford's men shifted uncomfortably, their certainty beginning to waver. Crawford stood silent, his face a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. For a moment, Victoria thought the boy's words had reached him, but then Crawford's face hardened again. "That doesn't change what your people have done." "No," Chief Tackawhite agreed, "and it does not change what your people have done to mine. But perhaps we can change what happens tomorrow." The standoff stretched into an eternity. Victoria could feel the fate of everyone present resting on a razor's edge. This fragile peace, born from a moment of courage, was about to be shattered, and she had no idea how to stop it. The silence in the ranch yard was a living thing, a coiled serpent ready to strike. Marcus Crawford's men held their rifles, their knuckles white, their eyes darting between their leader and the unarmed Comanche. This wasn't the battle they had ridden here for. There was no war party, no attack. There was only a quiet chief, a brave boy, and a collection of weapons lying uselessly in the dust. One of Crawford's men, a farmer named Peterson, lowered his rifle slightly. "Marcus," he said, his voice hesitant, "they did lay down their arms. That's got to mean something." Crawford shot him a venomous look, but the seed of doubt had been planted. He looked around and saw it on the faces of his other men. Confusion, uncertainty. The simple black and white world of good settlers and evil savages was crumbling before their eyes. "This changes nothing," Crawford insisted, but his voice had lost its iron certainty. "This is Ashford land. You have 1 hour to finish your business and be gone. After that, I can't guarantee your safety." It was a concession, however small. A step back from the brink. Chief Talkaway gave a grave nod. 1 hour is all we need." As the militia reluctantly held their positions, a strange, surreal scene unfolded. The Comanche continued their ceremony of gift-giving, their movements deliberate and dignified, ignoring the 60 rifles aimed at their backs. Victoria, standing beside her father, felt like she was trapped between two colliding worlds. But the real twist was yet to come. Nalnish, seeing that Crawford's hatred was still a simmering volcano, stepped forward once more. "Grandfather," he said in English, making sure every settler could hear him, "I must speak." Tahawit nodded. The boy looked directly at Crawford. His gaze was not one of fear but of profound seriousness. "The men who raided your home," he said, his voice clear and steady. "The men who took your family. They bring shame to the Comanche name. But they were not from our band." A low murmur rippled through the settlers. "They were the Iron Horse Band," Nalnish continued, his words dropping like stones into a silent pond. "Led by Chief Koteka, he raids the white settlements, then retreats south. But when the soldiers come for revenge, they do not know the difference. They attack any Comanche they find. My own uncle died in such an attack. The Iron Horse Band, they are our enemy as much as they are yours." This revelation was a bombshell. It shattered the settlers' core belief that all Comanche were a monolithic enemy. The idea that there were factions, alliances, and enemies among the tribes was a complexity they had never considered. Crawford stared at the boy, his mind visibly struggling to process this new information. "You're lying," he whispered, but it sounded more like a desperate hope than a conviction. "Nalnish speaks the truth," Chief Tachawait said, his voice resonating with authority. "For 3 seasons, Koteka's war has pushed my people from our hunting grounds. We are caught between his raids and the soldiers' revenge. We want peace, but peace can't grow in a field of lies." Victoria watched as the faces of the settlers changed. The hard lines of hatred began to soften, replaced by a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. Their entire war had been waged against a shadow, while the real enemy remained unseen. But Crawford was a man defined by his grief. To accept this truth would be to accept that his crusade of vengeance had been misdirected, that the hatred that had fueled him for 3 years was aimed at the wrong people. It was too much for him to bear. "Even if it's true," he snarled, "how can we trust you? How do we know this isn't some elaborate trick to get us to lower our guard?" It was William Ashford who answered. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Victoria's shoulder. "Marcus," he said gently, "3 years ago, when your wife Sarah was dying of fever, who rode through a blizzard to fetch the doctor?" Crawford flinched as if struck. "You did, William. You know you did." "And I did it because it was the right thing to do," William said, his voice ringing with moral clarity. "I didn't ask if she was from my family or yours. I saw a person in need. Yesterday my daughter did the same. She didn't see an enemy. She saw a child about to die. If we let our fear and our hatred strip that compassion from us, Marcus, then we've already lost. We lose our souls." The simple power of his words silenced the yard once more. Into that silence Chief Tuckaway spoke, his voice low and serious. "Words are wind," the chief said. "I will give you proof." He turned to his warriors. "I offer you one of my own, a hostage. Let my nephew, White Bear, stay here at this ranch. If any man from my band brings harm to your settlements, you may kill him. His life will be the guarantee of our word. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Both Comanche and settler alike stared in stunned disbelief. To offer a chief's own blood as surety was an act of faith so absolute it was almost incomprehensible. A tall, proud warrior named White Bear stepped forward, his face a stoic mask. He spoke briefly to his chief in their native tongue, then gave a firm nod. He was willing to be the sacrifice for peace. Crawford was speechless. This gesture defied every prejudice he held. It was a move of such honor and trust that it completely upended his worldview. He stood there, wrestling with the demons of his past and the undeniable truth of the present. The hatred that had been his constant companion for years was being challenged by a radical act of peace. But the final decisive blow was delivered by the boy. Nalnish walked off the porch and straight toward Marcus Crawford. He stopped just a few feet away from the hardened, grieving man. With a smooth, deliberate motion, he pulled a knife from the sheath on his belt. It was not a threatening gesture, but one of solemn purpose. He bent down and placed the knife on the ground, directly at Crawford's feet. Then he straightened up, looked the man who hated him in the eye, and spoke with a wisdom that seemed ancient. "I am 13 summers old," Nalnish said, his voice unwavering. "I have never harmed a white person. Yesterday, your world and my world collided. A white woman saved my life, and today my people came to honor that. We came in peace." He took a deep breath. "If you believe that all Comanche must pay for the crimes of the Iron Horse Band, then my life is yours. Pick up the knife. Avenge your family. I will not stop you." He paused, letting the weight of his offer settle over the stunned crowd. "But if you kill me," he finished, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "you will not be killing an enemy. You will be killing a boy who could have been your friend." The world stopped. Every eye was on Crawford. He stared down at the knife, then up at the boy who had just placed his life in his hands. Victoria held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was the moment, the pivot upon which their entire future would turn. Revenge or forgiveness, war or peace. Slowly, deliberately, Crawford bent down. His hand reached for the knife. For one terrifying, heart-stopping second, Victoria was sure he was going to do it. He picked up the knife. He held it in his calloused hand, the blade glinting in the morning sun. He looked at Nalnish, at the boy's unflinching eyes. He looked at Chief Takawait, at Victoria, at her father. He looked at the faces of his own men, who were watching him with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Then, with a movement that seemed to cost him every ounce of his strength, he turned the knife around, offering the handle back to Nalnish. "Keep your knife, boy," Crawford said, his voice thick with an emotion no one had ever heard from him before. "And keep your life." He took a ragged breath, the sound of a man breaking free from a prison of his own making. Maybe it's time this old man learned the difference between justice and vengeance. A wave of palpable relief washed over the ranch yard. It was as if the entire prairie had been holding its breath and had finally let it out. Crawford turned to Chief Takawait, his eyes clear for the first time in 3 years. "Your hostage is not necessary, Chief, but your information about Koteka and the Iron Horse, that would be welcome." The chief nodded, a look of profound respect on his face. "And we will welcome information about the movements of your soldiers. Shared knowledge will prevent the shedding of innocent blood on both sides." In that moment, something incredible was born. Not just the end of a standoff, but the beginning of an alliance. As the militia began to disperse, no longer a lynch mob, but a group of humbled men, Victoria watched as former enemies began to talk. Cautiously at first, then with a growing sense of shared purpose. They were no longer just settlers in Comanche. They were neighbors, united against a common foe. As the Comanche delegation prepared to leave, Nalnish rode his horse over to Victoria. He looked older, taller, as if he had aged a decade in a single morning. "Victoria Ashford," he said formally, "I will never forget that you chose to save me. My life is yours. If you ever need the help of the Wandering Wolf Band, you need only speak my name." Tears pricked at Victoria's eyes. "And you, Nalnish," she replied, her voice filled with admiration. "You have the heart of a chief. You may have saved more lives today than I could ever dream of. She stood with her father, watching them ride away, their figures shrinking against the vast horizon. A fragile, impossible peace had been forged in the crucible of her courage and a young boy's wisdom. It was just the beginning. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter echoed across the prairie. Victoria Ashford stood in the doorway of the new schoolhouse, a sturdy building made of pine and hope. In the yard below, a scene played out that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. The children of the Ashford Territory, white settlers, Comanche, and families from the New Mexican settlement to the south, played together, their games blissfully unaware of the lines that had once divided their parents. Among them was Nalnish. Now a tall, confident young man of 18, he served as the bridge between their worlds. He had been named Chief Takawait's successor before the old chief passed peacefully in his sleep 2 winters ago. Today, he was patiently teaching a small group of children, a Comanche girl, a Mexican boy, and the son of a white rancher, how to read. He moved seamlessly between English, Comanche, and Spanish, a living symbol of the new world they had all built together. The peace had held. It had been tested, of course. Raids from the Iron Horse band still happened, and old prejudices sometimes flared like embers in a dying fire. But the alliance forged that day at the Ashford Ranch had proven stronger than the hatred. The shared information between the settlers and Takawait's band had led to the protection of both communities and had slowly starved Koteka's raiders of their power. Marcus Crawford had become the peace's most unlikely and passionate advocate. He often told people that Nalnish hadn't just saved the territory from a war, he had saved Crawford's soul from being consumed by bitterness. Victoria had married a young doctor who came to the territory, drawn by whispers of this unique, thriving community. Together they ran the school and a clinic that treated anyone who needed care, no questions asked. Watching Nalnish help a young settler boy sound out a difficult word, Victoria thought back to that terrifying day of the stampede. She thought of the choice she made, the single instinctive act of compassion that had set everything in motion. Chief Takawait had been right. Courage has no color. It has no tribe. It lives in the heart. And when one person is brave enough to listen to it, the ripples can change the world. The buffalo were mostly gone from this part of the prairie now, but the legacy of that thundering herd and the boy who ran before it lived on in the laughter of these children. They were a new generation, growing up not with fear of their neighbors, but with friendship. And in their shared future, Victoria saw the ultimate proof that the most powerful force on earth isn't hatred or fear. It's the courage to choose a different path. What would you have done, staring at the enemy, a child about to die? Would you have turned away, or would you have ridden into the storm? Victoria's story shows us that one person, one single choice, can unravel generations of hatred. It proves that the courage to see the humanity in someone else, even in an enemy, is the most powerful weapon we have. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe that compassion is stronger than conflict, then you belong here with us. Do us the honor of hitting that subscribe button and joining our community. Together we can keep sharing the stories that remind us of the best parts of who we are and who we can choose to be. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story.